Here we go.
We're really into it today.
We are.
We're going to talk about being temperate. Welcome to Form, a counseling podcast. And I'm your host, Devin Leitch, Christian counselor and creator of Form Counseling Ministry. And I have with me again today Rick Dooley, my friend and brother and mentor and help, fellow counselor, and wise man. I always want to say Dr. Rick Dooley,
Well,
and it's because
what a compliment.
that's what you're providing. I don't know if you know that.
Thank you.
We're talking today in the 8 principles about principle number 4, and principle number 4 is temperate. Temperate. Now that's not a word we typically use. So if you're listening to this right now and you're like, I'm out, I don't get it, hang on a second. Hang on just a second. Come back in because you actually do know what this is. You do know what this means. And although the word may seem a little unfamiliar, I'm going to define it and explain it. Rick's going to help give some clarity on what this looks like in healthy relationships, and it's going to be beneficial. Rick, I'm going to start out by giving kind of a biblical idea of the definition of temperate, and then I want you to tweak it. Not tweak the Bible. That sounds terrible.
Right.
I want you to. I want you to add to that definition and help us tease it out to understand it. So, for those listening, temperate biblically is or refers to self-control, moderation, sobriety, particularly regarding appetites, emotions, and desires. It signifies a calm, disciplined, and balanced life. Term. There's two different Greek terms that denote what could be translated as temperate. One means vigilant, while the other actually legitimately and particularly means dominion within, which I think is a very interesting way to talk about
Mm.
one's own self. Dominion within, a self-control. Of course, we know that the self-control is one of the aspects of having the fruit of the Spirit. Notice I said singularly. I did it right that time. I'm going to get a lot of. I don't want social media comments
Right,
on the
right.
plurality of my use of fruits. It's one of the aspects of the fruit of the Spirit, self-control. It's one of the things mentioned in the qualifications for leadership in 1 Timothy 3. We're told to be temperate in all things in certain translations. Paul tells us that he is temperate in all things when he's comparing his life to that of an athlete in order to discipline himself. And we're also told in Proverbs 25:16 about this idea of only having enough. If you have found honey, it says, eat only enough for you, lest you have your fill of it and vomit it. Love the Proverbs. It always says things uh, so crassly and so harshly. It's very refreshingly honest and brash. So this is the definition of how then do you take this idea and apply this to healthy relationships and teach this. Talk to us about that for a minute.
So I think that the framing of all of that is exactly what we are encompassing, but we're going to kind of zero in and kind of dial into how it impacts our relationships. So the healthy relationships, the what we said, these are core principles of establishing a good healthy relationship. And if you've looked at the pattern that we've gone through so far, when we're talking about veritas, when we're talking about being rational, when we're talking about being imputable, we've been gearing this to almost the opposite of what we're talking about with temperance. Like we keep saying, focus on yourself, focus on yourself, focus on yourself, instead of everybody else. What you do impacts other people. This still holds true, but it's almost a little bit ironic that when we talk about being temperate, we're trying to bring in this concept of self and lessening our perception of ourself, either being too big or too small. With being temperate, we want to be the right size. So, you're not too big for your britches, you're not too small for them. It's like some people think too much of themselves, and we know what those people look like. When they show up in a room, it takes very little time to lose interest because all they're doing is talking about themselves, presenting themselves in a kind of a narcissistic, grander than life, I'm this great person. And like what is our natural reaction to people that show up that are very prideful? Like I think it's almost a
Rejection,
repulsive. Yes.
ick,
Yes.
repulsive. Yeah, that's right.
So if we're talking about though the opposite of that, which is not somebody though that is cowering in a corner, because that's not the goal either. So if you're going to hide in the corner, that's also about your self presentation. My I'm not going to let people get to know me. I'm either afraid of what they think of me, afraid of what I think. And again, we're trying to assume we are all trying to filter what we're doing through the Bible. Like, what are we supposed to be doing? So, the fruits of the Spirit, sorry, I said fruits. The fruit of
Oh,
the Spirit, yeah, I know.
ooh,
The,
you hear the alarms? They're coming to get you.
the, the fruit of the Spirit, though, is we're my impression of understanding the fruit of the Spirit is it's often not for us to eat, it's for others to eat. So what we develop in ourselves is what other people are kind of consuming. And so that ick factor of somebody showing up being very prideful and full of themselves, or somebody that is just so much work to draw them out, they'll never do anything. And they'll never do anything for the kingdom of God because they're really all about self. So there's a pride. We talk about that ditch on both sides of the road. There's a ditch over here with, too much of yourself and a ditch over here with too little of yourself. So the goal is to be humble. And so, you think of somebody that is humble and, you know, Devin, how would you describe somebody that presents as humble?
Well, we were always taught from a very early age that humble people were the ones that would easily talk bad about themselves and would easily keep their head hung low and kind of just have a very negative self view and sort of um, never want to admit that they did anything helpful. I've since grown out of that and have a very different perspective on what I'm looking for when I'm looking for a humble person. So nowadays, when I'm looking for a humble person, it's not a person that is thinking about themselves at all. I mean, I kind of take C.S. Lewis's idea of this in Mere Christianity when he's describing that a humble person is really not just someone who hangs his head low and talks bad about himself, but it's a person who's not really talking about himself at all. You like being around that guy, and he would be humble, but you wouldn't even refer to him as humble because you weren't even thinking about him as much as you found him to be just very interested in you. And I think that is the one of the better signs of humility than this head hanging low negativity, always demeaning yourself, because as you're talking about, the ditch on both sides of the road is that pride can look like talking about yourself poorly or talking about yourself really well. That's still both prideful in that you're still focusing on you and you're really not representing humility. So that I would look for that now
Hmm.
more so in this part of life.
And
I
part of
throw it
that's
back to you. What do you think about that?
well, and part of that's like we have that understanding. Like I know your understanding of this, and you'd even mentioned earlier that it was even the focus on self, like the self. If you are focusing on self,
Absolutely.
that rolls into pride.
Okay, so my definition of pride is thinking about yourself. That's it.
There you go. So,
Yeah.
so that's why I say it was almost a little bit of a paradox in that we are doing so much focus on the virtuous behaviors that we
Yeah.
bring to these relationships, and then we're saying, but it's really an absence of self. That's kind of how you
Mm.
know that you're nailing this one. You're not overly interested in other people to where you neglect you being part of the conversation or you being part of their life. and you're also not the star of the show. Like it doesn't have to be all about you one way or the other. And so when we
Mm.
think of somebody that's a humble person, we are not thinking about a prideful person. The thing that I find that people get confused is somebody that is a is if I say and encourage you, excuse me, if I encourage you to show humility, that's a quality of being humble. If you are going to bring humility, you're not bringing humiliation. That's where I find people get confused. Is
Yeah,
if you,
explain the difference. What's the
so
difference between being humble and being humiliated?
so somebody that has a somebody that's humble has humility, but the humiliation is when it's kind of that old saying of like people aren't laughing with me, they're laughing at me, and you feel humiliated, like when you feel shamed. And so if I am participating in maybe a family event and we're goofing around and dancing a little bit, somebody full of pride, they're not going to dance at all. They're going to be like, I'm too mature for this. I'm not going to, I don't play with my kids, because I would feel humiliated by being there to help entertain other people. And it's that sense of I become humiliated if people are laughing with me. And that is a hard thing for some people to sort out, is when you are bringing something to somebody else, you do have a chance to be rejected, and people could say some things to you or about you that can hurt your feelings. But in this true sense, you can't be humiliated unless you give your consent to be humiliated. So
Hmm.
there's a bit of another paradox there, is you see people that can go, be a ham, have a good time, act silly, and they're not humiliated. But other people will do the same thing and they come out feeling humiliated. And so being put down, being less than, those things are all part of this kind of skill to bring to the relationship. So recognizing again, like we're not just talking about disappearing, and we're not talking about stealing the show. We're talking about being balanced and right sized.
So, in your example of humiliation, it's a person who might not dance because it would be humiliating. It's a person who might not play with their kids because they'd be embarrassed to do so. This is kind of I mean, this is a little bit of antisocial behavior,
Mm-hmm.
but it's also an inability to see that the goodness in what you're doing for the other person. So if it's humiliating to you to play with your kids, it's because you don't see the value really in why it would be good to play with your kids. And you're saying that that inability to see that is actually wrong sizing yourself. So you think of yourself as so important and so inflated that it would be lowering yourself to do that, and there's an unwillingness to humiliate ourselves, which would be a lowering of ourselves to do this thing like play with kids.
You did a fabulous job of defining that, sorting that out. That's exactly what I'm trying to convey here, because um, there is value in what you're participating in. And you recognize that value. Whether or not they appreciate the value really isn't the point, because you are trying to bring something to the benefit of other people. So,
So okay, so I am around. So again, Rick, for the audience listening, Rick has been 30 or 23 years, 20 plus years at least in the Bureau of Prisons, and so he's been working primarily with antisocials now for 20 plus years. 30 30 years in counseling, but majority of that time, two-thirds of it, has been with antisocial people. So I'm thinking of this in my context. So let me take a stab at it here, okay?
absolutely.
I'm thinking of a Christian man, Christian men in my church, men who are maybe listening to this right now. They know they need to play with their kids. For them, it's not an issue of humiliation to do it. For them, it's wrong sizing their position in the family in regards to work home balance. So they don't see how not working at the job, stopping, going home, playing with the kids is actually a right decision, right, is
There
actually
you
a
go.
decision
There you
that is
go.
for the good of the family
There you go.
because they've wrong sized themselves in their importance in regards to income, let's say.
You're you're covering so much that is practical on that because it comes down to how do I determine what is right and what is wrong. I might have some
Okay, here we go.
confusion on
Yeah.
I might even
Yeah.
have confusion on that. And that this principle fits perfectly in with this because it's sometimes I will think what is right and what is wrong. And if I have a distorted view of that, I'm also going to have a struggle with setting limits and boundaries.
Yeah. Yes. So let me tell you, this whole concept, temperate,
Hmm.
self-controlled, right-sized, being useful in relationships. I can imagine how healthy this would immediately be in a marriage. I can imagine how healthy this would immediately be in a friendship, right? Because we're selling this, so if you will, back to healthy relationships, right? How these 8 principles are for interpersonal, healthy relationships with anybody, right? Because it's about
Correct.
what you're adopting in order to be the best you can be so that there's the relational aspect of your personhood is best served. What we have maybe failed to say enough throughout all of these is that the best thing you can do for a relationship is to adopt certain attitudes and principles in yourself that are useful in those relationships. And a lot of times people think of relationships as being 50-50, but it would be better to think about relationships, not just marriage, but really all relationships, as I will do 100% my part in this relationship. And the other person needs to, right? If they want a healthy relationship, it would
That's
be
right.
best for them to
Right.
do 100% of their part. But even if they don't, my responsibility is to do 100% of my part, which is to be honest, to be imputable or to take
Hmm.
responsibility, to be rational in the way that I approach these things, and then to be temperate.
Right.
Now,
Right.
saying all that and getting back to the practical aspect of this guy listening, let's say, who's at work, who doesn't see the need to go home or sees the need to go home to his kids, but is wrong sizing which responsibility to attend to. Okay?
Hmm.
This reminds me so much of the concept of the Sabbath. Because one of the reasons God instituted the Sabbath in the Old Testament was to cause Israel to stop working because they had to work every single day for survival. He caused them to stop working for the sake of acknowledging that He was the sustainer of life and that He was the one that would provide for them sustenance, provide for them the ability to survive in the
Right.
wilderness, right?
Right.
And so the stopping work for an entire day was a huge risk for them. The inability to do what they normally did for themselves in a world, in an ancient world where everything, there's no super Walmart, there's no drive through, everything is, we have to till it, plant it, reap,
Toil.
sow, toil, constant toil. The Sabbath was a reminder of faith. There's an aspect here that coincides with right sizeness that has to do with faith, which is something we were talking about before we even started recording. And that concept is that if you're listening and you know what you ought to do, you're responsible for doing it. That's first. Second is right sizing yourself makes you realize you're really not the sustainer of life and you're really not the sustainer of all these things. And that exercising faith may mean doing the thing you know is right, even though it doesn't feel right or maybe makes sense to you. Speak to
That
that a minute. I said a lot of
yeah.
things. Say
No.
something to that.
What the value in that is a pivotal in trying to establish. I think we often think about just that the one extreme when we're talking about pride and lacking humility. We think about somebody that thinks they kind of act like the world revolves around them. But then on the opposite side of that, you're also exactly what you're saying. You're not the sustainer of the universe. You're not even the sustainer of your family. You have a responsibility to your family. And if you're exercising that principle of being, imputable and exercising responsibility, that part is pivotal. It's a but everything doesn't depend on you. It actually hangs on our provider. Who's the provider
Mhm.
of you? And that is your relationship with God. And so
Yes.
it's having that faith that maybe I come into this and I'm very aware of the two sides of personality extremes. Like I'm an extrovert, and I have a tendency to make everything all about me, and I share a lot, or I'm the polar opposite and I'm the introvert. And I don't say anything, just want to kind of hide, be by myself. We're being part of a healthy relationships mean coming out of your comfort zone for the benefit of other people, and knowing that this is exactly what you're talking about is kind of a calling to be responsible for your part in that relationship. It doesn't all hang on you, and nothing's all, the world doesn't revolve around you, but you're an important part of it. And so again, it's kind of, how do I show up into this relationship with somebody?
That's really helpful. So I want to bring in a couple things now that are in regards to this. So I love this concept of right sizeness, right? I love this concept. Not not completely unimportant, not dismissible, not inflated or egocentric or making it all about me, right? But a right sizeness. And I think that some of this probably overlaps with the concept of self-awareness,
Mm-hmm.
right? Understanding your right, being right sized has to recognize what your responsibilities are, and and what you are to be about, how good you are at it, how bad you are at it, right? And being honest about those things. We go back to the top again. One of the things you've said, this is a good place to insert it. All of these attributes, all of these principles flow and overlap
Together.
together. They work together. And so, again, the honesty, as I just said, matters a lot for being responsible, and responsible matters a lot for being the right sized or self controlled, temperate.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, I feel like you can start at any one of these points, any one of the
Right.
four things we've already talked about, and you can get to
Exactly.
the other one pretty quickly.
That's right.
Um, in a book that I recommend called Leadership and Emotional Sabotage, Joe Rigney is talking a lot about this idea of sober mindedness. And I want to enter this into the chat, if you will, because sober mindedness is another way to not be led by passions. And I would say that, we're told in Proverbs not to trust, to not to lean on our own understanding, but to trust the Lord. And that's a proverbial way of saying be sober minded. And sober mindedness is the idea that you're not being led by passions, as the Bible will call them, or just not being led by emotions. I want to get into a little bit of a conversation here about how our emotions are tied to pride. Okay?
Yeah. Well, I think that that's a good transition into this, because part of this concept of temperate is, when I think of somebody that is temperate, I don't think of them as a hothead. I think of them as somebody that's level headed. So somebody that's level headed is in charge of their emotions. And you probably wouldn't even recognize somebody that's truly humble, maybe the challenge that they have to be level headed. They just present themselves that way. And so we start to kind of get into a little bit of self discipline, not just acting on our emotions. And it's, the world isn't all about me and what I feel. And it's not all about what everybody else thinks or whatever they might think of me. It's really challenging what is the accurate concept, what is the accurate perception. And so sometimes when we think people have done something to us and we feel slighted, we have a tendency to pop off. We're hypersensitive to criticism, and maybe that invokes some of that humility difficulty, as we might, think they're dismissive of me and there's no way that I'm going to allow that to happen, or are very comfortable with people just walking all over me. And so that
Mm.
starts to, just because people walk over you doesn't mean you don't feel resentful. It doesn't mean that you weren't passive and you know it, and that's negatively impacting that other person because you didn't say anything, because you're allowing people to do certain things to you, or you're blowing up and not letting people be normal people and have an opinion. And so part of this is recognizing that you are growing in your ability to exercise emotional control. And when you do that, you're bringing a sense of strength to that relationship. So you may not always feel like going and doing something, or you might feel like you don't want to do something, or you do. It's trying to find out what's my responsibility here? What
That's
do I
an
need to
important
do?
point. That's an important thing you said. Don't think that if you're listening to this and you're a quiet person that somehow this doesn't apply to you. That's almost too simple, but it's funny to me. It's kind of humorous because a lot of times we can think that my silence or my lack of speaking is self-control. It's not. Your lack of speaking could actually just be resentment building.
And
Your
what happens
quiet,
after we build up resentment? After you've built up a lot of resentment, you generally are no longer presenting yourself as level headed. A lot of times then we
right.
blow up. And then we have these, classic example of couples counseling is the kitchen sink. The kitchen sink fight is actually a term in couples counseling, is like we brought everything into this except for the kitchen sink. It's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
I brought up everything you've done in the past 25 years, and you brought up everything I did, but we didn't bring in the kitchen sink. So it's like, but those resentments, they're having an effect on you. And so I think that's such an important point, Devin, is like to point out that people that are quiet does not mean that they're not the ones that are actually seething inside, and that this may
Yeah,
be even
because
more important for them to listen to.
in the personality profile, we know that neuroticism, which is the measurement of negative emotion in people, breaks down into two aspects. And those two aspects are volatility and
Hmm.
withdrawal.
Hmm.
Well, just because you're withdrawn doesn't mean you're experiencing any less negative emotion, as you would it if you were volatile and explosive and angry and loud and etc. So, your response does not indicate, even your natural internal response does not indicate that you're not full of pride. For instance, it doesn't
Absolutely.
indicate that you're not still self-absorbed. It can mean that you're just expressing self-absorption or self-thought in one of two ways, but that doesn't mean that either one are an indication you're handling it better or that you're doing well.
Right.
On the same term, I don't want to be just completely negative about everything. On the same aspect, it doesn't indicate that you're not, right? It you can you what you're trying to teach us, what I'm drawing out of you and what I want to talk about is this concept of temperate that you can apply. So what I'm trying to say, and I think what you're agreeing with, is that your response, whether it be withdrawal or a volatile loud expression, those don't need to be used as alarm system as to whether this is going well. Both can be indications as not going well, and both can be indications that it is going well. This is just the way that you respond. What you're saying is to cut through that is to apply the right sizedness, correct?
So right, and that's where I think this where we can trust somewhat of our conscience on this, is I think the people that we're talking to, that they're feeling this. They have an awareness of this. And so it's like God will bring things to our conscience of, this is a struggle. You're very quiet and you're a nice person, but you're also not helpful sometimes, right? And so
Yeah.
it's like
Yeah, that's right.
and
Yeah.
again, not to be negative, but it's like I've struggled with this a lot, and it's like recognizing that sometimes being quiet and being passive is actually problematic, and in an argument
Yeah,
or
the
in
audience needs to know
something.
your withdrawal, I'm volatility, if we had to put those.
Well, you went advanced on the personality things anyway. Like we haven't even talked about the personalities. It's like there's so many aspects to what is our natural inclination to either be part of something and be kind of outgoing, and but so much of it is actually, if we want to look at our heart of hearts, and the Bible does cut through us and exposes what we need to work on. And so I'm not trying to make things painful for you, but we are trying to bring an awareness, because over and over I keep saying this is about you showing up. This is about you having an impact, recognizing that whether you show up or not, you're having an impact. It's what type of impact do you want to have? And if we're Christians, that means we do want to exercise faith, and we want to grow and glorifying God. And not just saying that, but actually living it. And these things are actually roadblocks to us demonstrating maybe love to other people, because we're more self-conscious. We're self-conscious of what are they going to think of me. Maybe I want to bring somebody dinner that I knew was sick, and I don't bring it to them because I'm so
Mm.
concerned that they might criticize what I fix them. And so then I don't do anything. And so
Well, they
what I'm
might
saying is
be
that,
inconvenienced, or yeah, that's exactly right. It's a good
and
analogy.
therefore that's a matter of pride. That is a matter of, that's not being humble and right size. That's thinking too much or too little. Like, what was the point? What is the point of bringing somebody a dinner?
Yep. It's to love them and serve them and bless them.
And if that's not being accomplished because you're getting in the way of yourself, then that's an area that we can work on. So we've said before, like, this is, you don't just pick and choose all of these. They kind of come together.
Hmm.
It's a matter of recognizing that you're stronger in some areas and you're not so strong in other areas. And so we're
I
trying to,
love
this
that.
this is a big one.
I love that you took your own personal uh, kind of negative thinking and use that as an analogy, because the analogy you just used is, what if I'm trying to bring someone dinner? My thinking is, my prideful thinking is not temperate, is, well, what if they don't like it, or what if I inconvenience them, right? And that gets in your way. That's a wrong sizeness in becoming small. I've seen it also where there's a wrong sizedness in being too large, and that is, I bring you dinner, you don't thank me for it. You don't like it enough. You don't remind me of how much it blessed you. You don't tell me how good I am for doing it.
Right.
That's an indication that you brought dinner to get praise and approval
There you
and
go.
not to actually bless the other person, and that's a wrong sizeness in the other direction.
Correct. And
Both are what we're saying is, both are prideful, correct?
absolutely. And we talk about biblically about hospitality, right? And
Yes.
that part, I think hospitality can really play into this one, because if we're worried about kind of our, being temperate and being humble, and again, I kind of hone in on that, is there's a lot that gets in the way of us, and you know part of that fellowship with one another, whether or not we want to participate or we over participate. And maybe it's maybe you're not there for the right reasons. You're there thinking too much about yourself either way. And so it's kind of coming back to the point of, we're trying to be beneficial in our relationships, grow our relationships. And the less it is about us, the probably the better it is. Um, and I want to make sure that this is probably one of the challenges, is that contextually it's hard to go through so many scenarios in which this is applicable, but that's part of the challenge, but it's also your challenge. This information has now been presented to you. What do you do with it? Do you make excuses for it, or do you kind of look at yourself and go, hey, I struggle in this area, and my goodness, who doesn't? We all
Absolutely.
struggle in every one of these areas. So it's not to beat people up, it's to bring awareness as to, I can do some things a little bit different to strengthen the relationships, because we're called to fellowship with other people. And if we are strengthening that, then what happens at the end of that? When we talked about the fruit of the spirit, if it's for other people to eat, then they get blessed by that, and then they
Yes.
glorify God, which is extremely important, because at the end of the day, I think it feels better when God is being glorified and we're not the center of attention. We
Amen.
know that we were that
That's right.
conduit to give God glory, and that's something that's almost indescribable. But I think that when you hit that, you know that you're not struggling in this temperate area.
That's right.
You're you know that you've got it right. And so it's actually that part where yourself tends to disappear, but the people around you are getting blessed and God is getting glorified and you're nailing it.
That's right. And if you, I want to add two things to what you just said. The first is that this represents God, because I like what you said earlier. I don't think you said it exactly like this, but I wrote it down. I'm not sure if, I think it was before we even started recording, but you said that pride is the enemy of being temperate. And I love that. I think of that passage in James 4 that it said God opposes the proud but gives grace to the humble. And the concept there is God readies his army against the prideful. He's at war with them, which is a terrifying idea, but he gives grace to the humble, the ones who are not about themselves.
Hmm.
And so that's an encouraging Bible verse really to concentrate on. You can go read it in context if you're listening and see what I'm saying there. It's absolutely what he means in that context, and I'm not taking it out. I'm just quoting the one verse, but due to the sake of time. Um, so pride is the enemy of being temperate, um, and therefore we are embracing the character of God in Christ when we are seeking to be temperate. And I just wanted to step back and then say again, I think people are starting to see and feel, if you've listened to all of these, the concept that these 8 principles are actually things we're going to adopt if we're going to have healthy relationships. This is not one of those things you sit and watch and then go, man, they really need to be doing this. And this one hits home more than in almost any of the other ones in the aspect of I need to adopt this, not I hope everyone changes so that my relationships are easier.
Which is the irony of this particular one with the temperance. It's like
Right,
self.
right.
It's an absence of self, but it's really I've got to do a little focus in order for me to develop this. And everybody does have
Yeah,
their
it
own
is.
responsibility,
It's
but it's
I don't
their
know who said it
responsibility.
about
It's not
humil
just it's not just your you don't have control over other people, but you do have healthy limits and boundaries that you start to recognize that if you're not a doormat and you're not trying to use other people as a doormat.
Yeah.
And those are some of I know it's a kind of a just a general analogy, but we have a tendency to either use people or be used by people. And and I think as you very kind of eloquently were putting the examples from previously, it's like some of your own development is recognizing we have a tendency to just put ourselves down, not take credit, not be happy about things that we've accomplished. And that's those are not the correct view that we're trying to get. We are trying to say there are things that you've done and that you can do better and that you can continue to bring value to these relationships. And so sometimes people try to get away with things like use other people, or and maybe I'm guilty of trying to use other people or letting them use me. And that's not the concept that we're trying to develop. We're saying, have some healthy limits, have some healthy boundaries. You have them for your kids. It's like it's important to figure out how do you allow your children to talk to you without being prideful. It's like that's not good for them to talk to people that way. If they continue to talk to me that way, they're going to go out in public and they're going to talk to other people that way. That's not going to go well for them. So therefore, let me challenge that type of behavior and get them to think about it and find value in using people in a healthy manner. Like how do we interact with them and grow together? And that happens in the church, it happens at work, it happens in your marriage, it happens in your families. And that's why I talk about the 8 cores of interpersonal relationships, because it's all intertwined and interpersonal.
I can see someone listening to this, a married couple, and it's so easy to do this. We get trapped in this bad habit. You listen to this, you go, Devin and Rick made a lot of sense. I'm going to do this. And then maybe your husband comes home from work and says something that you don't like, and you turn to him and you're like, you're not being right sized right now. You know, again,
right?
I just want to bring this up because I want to
Yeah.
tell
It's
husbands and wives, fathers and mothers, children. I want to tell everybody these are not to weaponize against each other.
and that's where we were talking before, is by you changing your response, maybe how you used to respond, you're going to impact that relationship. So maybe it's somebody is saying you're not being right size, but they're kind of abusive in the way that they talk to you. Setting a healthy boundary and saying, "Hey, maybe we need to cool off for a minute. I'm going to leave for 5 minutes and come back, and maybe we can continue this conversation when we've cooled down." That's you setting a healthy boundary. That's a challenge, and maybe that other person's not used to responding to you in that way. But it's not, you're not engaging and throwing fuel on the fire, and then we have a kitchen sink fight. It's we're going to try and stick to the one issue. Let's try to resolve this. And
Well, I think we could say that a person who would weaponize this and say to another person, "You're not doing this," themselves are
exactly,
themselves being wrong sized.
correct,
Right? Because they're
hundred
emphasizing,
percent,
I should have been treated better. I deserved more than you gave me. I don't like what I'm seeing, and really life's about me, and I should get what I want. And so you should be more of what Rick was talking about so that my life is
right,
easier and my relationship's easier. And that's it's humorous and ironic, but it's a trap we all
correct.
have
It
fallen
really
into.
is. Hmm.
And so to step back and realize that if you're noticing this in other people and you want this for other people, even that could be a trap where it's really about you again. And you're once again, you're not being restrained. You are acting out, trying to get something for yourself that you don't really deserve. And if you had practiced this in the first place, may not have even received.
And I think that that's very important to point out. And I see a lot of people that really struggle with this are the ones that think they don't need to do any work on this. Like, I don't struggle with this. I don't struggle with using people. You're probably the type of person that might,
Yeah.
it's a false presentation or a false sense of humility. And in reality, it's like, do I really tend to use people more for my benefit than I'm trying to be of benefit to them? And I really like your example, Devin, about like saying, hey, don't, realistically, I'm helping that person so that they give me praise. They give me, a pat on the back and boost my self esteem. And maybe that's a bit of that ditch that we're talking about. So
Yeah.
it's a nuance here, but it's a valuable one, and we're hypersensitive again to point it out in other people while we have a log in our own eye,
There you
right?
go. That's
So
right. That's right. Okay, so to wrap up, let's do this. I would like to go back through the first four so far, and I would like to have you lead, if you could, one into another, and as we piece together this description of what these these eight healthy principles are. We've got through the first four. I'm just going to read the first four that we've actually been through, and I kind of want you just to link them together one by one, if you could,
okay.
and describing what it looks like to adopt these in relationship to trying to be a healthy person and relate to people in a healthy way. Okay, so the first principle is veritas, truth, honesty, integrity.
So when I think of that, I do have the Bible verse, and it says Proverbs 10:9, whoever walks in integrity walks securely, but he who makes his ways crooked will be found out. If you're living in a life that is where you're trying to be honest and you're trying to walk with integrity, and which you are dependable, so to speak, because you're really trying to talk the or walk the walk, not just talk the talk, you feel secure. When we're deceiving people and manipulating people and using people, there's uh, there's a sense that we put off to other people, I believe, and they're standoffish from you, and you're probably not as slick as you think you are. And we've said a bunch of times, you're only as sick as your secrets. So being being honest, we all struggle. Nobody's doing all of these eight attitudes, or excuse me, eight principles right. It's we all struggle, but we're all on the road to doing it better. And so I think that brings a sense of security, and that maybe I admit my struggles and I take an honest look at myself and I admit some of these things, that other people are willing to work with me now. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
they'll feel more secure that this person's uh, more the person I want to have a relationship with. So,
And people can go back and listen to that episode where we dealt with just this alone.
mhm.
If you don't have honesty in a relationship, the consequences of that are something we talked about, and it's you don't have a relationship unless you have honesty. Basically,
Right,
is what we
right,
concluded. And integrity also has to do with being able to admit things about yourself and be honest about them in order to bring that into a relationship to make it healthy.
right, which rolls into that second one of being imputable. So,
Imputable.
imputable
Good.
is the
You
part
took
where
the
it's,
bait. This is going well.
yeah, well, it's like that. This is how you show up in a relationship, right? Like, are
Mm-hmm.
you showing up for other people? Because we said imputable is where people are going to give you accountability, like for your actions, and you being willing to take accountability for your actions. It's we often sometimes, well, not everybody. Some people take on too much responsibility. Other people don't take on enough, and so we're just recognizing that we're stepping into this willingness to accept, my own responsibilities. And so, um, you know it's not being defensive of what you've done. It's actually taking ownership of what you've done, good, bad, or indifferent, and being willing to continue to make effort and improve. So, and it's nice when you're in a relationship with two people that are willing to be accountable to one another.
And that accountability and that imputability, that ability to take responsibility for yourself, can only happen if you are rational.
Correct. So we're saying that if you're going to look at everything, we want to have an accurate perception, not one that we've got distorted because we often walk in with different past experiences. We think we like to put our own spin on things versus let's be factual, just the facts, and try to see it from that point of an objective perspective. And that helps us take a step back from our emotions. And so sometimes we can gain a better, clear, factual account of what's going on instead of being so emotionally invested. So if I'm saying my goal is to be, I'm going to exercise being rational right now, I'm going to pull back from my emotions and figure out, hey, this is what's going on. This might be what this other person is looking at, the same situation, and we have different perspectives on it. But I can state what that other person's perspective is. And so when we
Mm-hmm.
talk about clear communication, about healthy communication, we could repeat back what the other person is observing and they would say that's right, even if we
Mm.
disagree with it. But if we're
Excellent.
objective, I can describe it, they agree, and then we can work from that point.
And in doing this, it's best able to be done when there's not even a hint or a sniff of it being about us, which leads to temperate.
So, and again, that being right size, being humble, level headed, um, not exalting yourself, wanting what's good for that other person, and being willing to come out of your comfort zone, whether you're kind of introverted or extroverted, you're able to kind of step up to the plate and be part of anything that you're involved with. Recognizing if you're in this situation, if you're in this relationship, whatever, how small or how big, you have impact one way or another. So be right sized.
Excellent. Excellent. Next time, we will deal with number 5, which is unprejudiced. I'm looking forward to principle number 5 as well. As we work through these 8 principles of healthy relationships, I hope you've enjoyed them as well. Rick, thank you once again. If you like the podcast, make sure to give us a like, subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast subscription program, whether that's Apple, Spotify, YouTube. Make sure that you subscribe and interact with the posts there. That helps us continue to make this content. And we sure hope you enjoyed it. If you have ideas or thoughts, you can email us at formcounselingministry@gmail.com. You can also comment or message on Facebook and Instagram, as well as through the website, formcounselingministry.org. We look forward to hearing from you, and we look forward to the next episode as we deal with these 8 principles.
And one other thing, I don't know if anybody's figured it out. If you've listened to this very end right here, we're creating an acronym. And our acronym is going to be virtuous. So be virtuous,
Big
everybody.
reveal.
All right.
Be virtuous. All right. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Rick. Bye-bye.